The first human collapsed on day 3. Zane Trenton was elbow-deep in a coolant module on the lower deck of the interspecies research ship Velastria when the announcement came through the comm system. All personnel to medbay, immediate quarantine protocol. Human bioform exhibiting critical symptoms. Zane sighed, pulled his arm out of the panel and looked down at the faint shimmer of coolant on his gloves. Again, he muttered. He wiped his hands on his jumpsuit and jogged toward the lift. The corridors were already bathed in a soft red light, a warning glow that meant something was very wrong. When he reached med bay, 2 Cyrean medics were already suited up in full containment gear, their pale blue limbs moving with mechanical precision. Inside the sealed room, Corporal Dean Halley was sprawled across a diagnostic bed, convulsing. His skin was blotched with crimson lesions, and he was gasping like he couldn't find air. Zane didn't step inside. He knew better. Instead, he waited by the glass as Dr. Entra, the head biological officer on board, adjusted the controls on the sanitation pod. He was fine yesterday, Zane said. Dr. Entra didn't turn. Symptoms manifested overnight. Extreme fever, internal bleeding, loss of equilibrium. Is it contagious? We don't know yet, but it's not native to Earth. This isn't yours, Zane's brow furrowed. Then where is it from? Dr. Entra finally looked up. Her eyes, large, lidless, and glowing, faintly met his. Tarkle 4. It was dormant in the soil samples. Zane took a slow step back. We've been working with those samples for 3 weeks. You're not symptomatic. No, he pressed his palm to his chest. I feel fine. Dr. Entra turned back to the console. Then we wait. But be prepared if you're infected. The next 48 hours will be decisive. Dean Halley died 17 hours later. By the end of the day, 2 more humans were in isolation. Symptoms were the same, just faster. Violent fevers, then organ failure. The alien crew began whispering, though Zane couldn't understand most of it. The translation nodes only worked when someone actively spoke into them. By day 5, panic had taken hold. The ship's commander, a tall, emerald-scaled species called a Valari, called an emergency assembly in the forward atrium. Zane stood near the back, arms crossed, watching the crew shift uneasily. The viral agent appears engineered, the commander said. It adapts rapidly. Only humans are affected. We've traced the origin to the Tarkle 4 excavation. No other species on board is exhibiting symptoms. Are you saying it targets us specifically? Zane asked. The room went quiet. Yes, the commander said. Or more likely, your physiology makes you susceptible beyond our modeling. You lack certain immune protocols. Zane's jaw clenched. So we're just going to wait and see who drops next. Dr. Entra stepped forward. We are researching countermeasures, but your immune response is volatile, irregular. Zane looked around. There were only 6 humans left. 3 had already died. 1 was unconscious in med bay. That left 2 besides himself still upright. You're saying we weren't expected to survive this? That is correct, said the Valari. Based on the observed progression, your kind lacks the necessary resistance. Survival rates approach 0, Zane blinked. And you're telling me this like you're reading weather updates. The Valari turned its head slightly. Would you prefer dishonesty? He left the room before he said something stupid. Back in his quarters, Zane paced. The air recycling hissed softly overhead. His bunk was untouched. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His joints ached, and he'd started sweating through his shirt without knowing when it began. He sat against the wall and closed his eyes. By morning, the fever hit. He woke on the floor with his mouth dry and his forehead slick. His vision blurred when he stood. He stumbled to the comm panel and hit the emergency beacon. 2 hours later, he was in med bay, hooked up to a nutrient Roman 4. Dr. Entra stood over him, frowning. You're displaying secondary symptoms, she said. But your vitals are abnormal. In what way? You have a fever of 104, but your heart rate is stable. Your electrolyte levels are low, but you're producing antibodies. Isn't that what's supposed to happen? That's not what happened with the others. She moved a scanner over his chest. Your immune system is reacting with extreme aggression. It's damaging your own tissue. Zane coughed. It rattled in his lungs. So I'm dying faster. No, somehow you're surviving. He passed out before she could explain. The next 3 days were a blur. Fever dreams, flashes of light, the sound of voices arguing in languages he didn't know. Once he opened his eyes and saw a Sirlian standing over him, its eyes wide in what looked like disbelief. Another time, he saw Dr. Entra slumped against the wall, staring at a data pad. He woke fully on day 9. The fever was gone. His muscles ached and his throat felt like sandpaper, but he was alive. Really alive. Dr. Entra was still in the room. She looked up from her screen, startled. "You're awake," she said. Zane licked his lips. "Water." She handed him a cup. He drank slowly. "You're the only one to recover," she said. "We monitored your immune markers. Your body generated a protein compound that interfered with the virus's replication cycle." Was that luck? Dr. Entra didn't answer right away. It shouldn't have been possible. Your biology lacks the adaptive cell layers we expected to see in a survivor. Well, guess we're full of surprises. She studied him. You should be dead. Yeah, I get that a lot. He tried to sit up. Pain flared in his back, but he managed to swing his legs over the side of the bed. Easy, she said. I'm fine. You're not. You lost weight. You need physical therapy, but you're no longer contagious. He looked around. Where's the rest of the crew? Still aboard. The aliens are keeping their distance. You're considered anomalous, Zane nodded. Let me guess. They think I'm some kind of outlier. No, she said. They think you're a statistical error. He laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. Figures? 2 days later, Zane was walking again, slowly and with help, but walking. The alien crew treated him differently now. Not with reverence, but with caution, like he was radioactive. He passed a group of Valeri engineers in the corridor. They stopped talking as he approached. One of them made a gesture, a kind of warding sign. Zane didn't have the translator on, but he got the message. Back in Med Bay, Dr. Entra was reviewing samples from his blood. You developed antibodies faster than our entire database predicted, she said. We've synthesized them. We're testing them on the remaining infected human. Is it working? I don't know yet. But if it does, we might be able to inoculate others. Zane leaned against the wall. So, I'm a lab rat now. You're a miracle. I'd rather be a lab rat. He slept better that night. Not well, but better. On day 12, the other infected human's fever broke. Dr. Entra called Zane to Med Bay. She's stabilizing, she said. Her vitals are improving. Zane looked through the glass. The woman's face was pale, but her breathing was steady. He exhaled. You used my blood. We isolated the protein that allowed your immune system to respond. Synthesized it. It's not perfect, but it's working. So what now? The Valeri commander entered the room, its gaze pinned Zane. You recovered in 7 days. That is unprecedented, Zane shrugged. Guess I had something to prove. The alien tilted its head. Your species is unpredictable. Yeah, we get that a lot. The commander stepped closer. We assumed your physiology was too unstable to withstand the virus. We assumed wrong. Zane met its eyes. So what do you do when your assumptions fail? The Valeri paused. We adapt. Dr. Entra smiled faintly. That's what humans do best, isn't it? Zane didn't answer right away. He watched the monitors, listened to the steady beep of the recovering patient's heart rate. Yeah, he said, but it usually hurts like hell first. The next day, the ship's quarantine lifted. The remaining human crew began returning to duty. Slowly, cautiously. Zane stayed in Med Bay for another 3 days, undergoing tests, feeding his body back to strength. When he was finally released, he walked the upper corridor alone. The stars outside looked the same, but something had changed. Not just in him, in how the others looked at him. Dr. Entra found him by the observation bay. You're cleared for full duty, she said. Good, I'm tired of laying down. I've submitted your case to the Galactic Medical Consortium. They want to study your immune response at a deeper level. Figures. She hesitated, then added, You scared us. Zane looked at her. I scared myself, she nodded, but you came back. He turned back to the stars. "Yeah," he said. "I came back." Zane sat on the edge of the galley bench, unwrapping a protein wrap with fingers that still trembled slightly whenever he reached too fast. The ship's artificial gravity always felt just a few degrees off after a stretch in Med Bay, like the floor was subtly trying to tilt away from his center of mass. He ignored it. The wrap tasted like compressed lentils and something vaguely citrusy, but it was better than the clear nutrient sludge they'd fed him for over a week. Across from him, a Yevran biologist named Tulloch watched with a posture that might have been fascination or revulsion. It was always difficult to tell with her species, since they lacked facial musculature. She adjusted the translator node on her collar, then gestured at his tray. "You consume nourishment despite recent systemic trauma. This demonstrates what?" Zane took another bite before answering. "Hunger. Clarify. It means I feel like I could eat a crate of these," he said, chewing. "Even though they taste like recycled optimism." Tulloch tilted her head, a motion that made her cranial ridges click faintly. "You prioritize caloric intake over palatability?" "Yeah, that's sort of our thing." She scribbled something onto a thin display sheet without looking down. "Your gastrointestinal function resumed without pharmacological reconditioning. That is statistically irregular. Thanks, I think." She leaned forward slightly. "If I may request, please describe your subjective experience of immune combat." "I don't remember most of it," Zane said, wiping his hand on his pant leg. "Just fragments, nightmares. Woke up twice thinking I was buried alive. At one point, I thought I was having a conversation with my 8th grade math teacher, which was extra weird since she died 5 years ago. This suggests cortical misfiring during febrile episodes. Did the hallucinations share a thematic coherence?" "Yeah. They all made me feel like something was watching me from inside my own skull." "Not fun." Tulloch tapped her pad again. "Human neurology is poorly understood even among your own medical community, yet you survived a pathogen designed to dismantle cellular integrity within 2 sleep cycles. Such resilience contradicts over 70% of our projections. You're welcome. This is not gratitude, it is recalibration, still taking it as a win." She stood abruptly and walked off without a farewell, her long frame gliding silently between the other tables. Zane watched her go, then looked down at his half-eaten wrap. Appetite gone. 2 hours later, he was in the hydroponics chamber, moving slowly between rows of nutrient trays. The plants here were a mix, some Earth origin, others from systems whose names he couldn't pronounce. A few glowed faintly, casting delicate shadows against the walls. The only sounds were the faint hum of circulation pumps and the occasional chirp from the environmental sensors. He found Vaic there, the only other human who'd made it through the worst of the infection. She was crouched beside a tray of leafy stalks, trimming them with a tool that looked like a hybrid between scissors and a tuning fork. "You're up," she said without looking at him, apparently. Zane leaned against the frame of a grow rack, watching her hands move. She looked thinner than before, but her eyes weren't dull anymore. "How long have you been out of med?" "Since last watch cycle. They're still drawing blood every 3 hours. Same." She stood, wiping her fingers on her sleeve. "They started asking if I had any unusual dreams. Let me guess." "Memory imprinting, right?" Vaic nodded. "They think the virus tried to overwrite neurological patterns, like it was testing our identity structure." Zane whistled softly. "That's not creepy at all. I told them I dreamed I was a tree. Was it a good tree? Had roots that touched the ocean floor, felt everything, then caught fire and didn't die." Zane blinked. "That's poetic." "I was trying to be honest." They stood in silence for a moment, the grow lights casting slow-moving halos across the ceiling. "I think they're scared of us now," she said, not scared. "Confused. Same thing when you're armed with microscopes instead of rifles." She returned to trimming the stalks more gently this time. Later that cycle, Zane reported to the med lab as ordered. The room had changed. Since his last visit. 2 additional isolation chambers now stood dormant along the far wall, their glass walls etched with faint hexagonal patterns. Dr. Entra was already there, surrounded by a cloud of data projections. "Sit," she said without looking up. Zane sat. A mechanical arm extended from the ceiling and gently clamped around his forearm, drawing another blood sample with a hiss and a click. He didn't flinch. "You've been in contact with Vaic. She's not contagious. Not the issue. We're monitoring for shared anomalies." He raised an eyebrow. "You think we're mutating? Your immune system shows signs of retained hyperreactivity. You're filtering out airborne proteins now, ones that should pass unnoticed, so my body's gone paranoid. That's one interpretation." She tapped through 3 more layers of data. "You're producing a protein chain we've never cataloged before, not even in other human samples." Zane stared at her. "Should I be worried? I don't know yet, but it's replicating slowly, which implies stability." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "So now I'm a walking immunological mystery." "You were already that. Now you're a consistent one." "Fantastic." Dr. Entra stepped away from the display and handed him a translucent capsule. "Swallow this. It'll track your metabolic drift for the next 6 shifts." Zane inspected the capsule. "This gonna beep every time I think about cheese." "Only if your endocrine levels spike." He swallowed it dry. 2 shifts later, he was summoned to the diplomatic wing. He found himself standing in an oval chamber ringed with vertical light panels. The Valari commander was present, along with 2 lesser-ranked officers and a small, rectangular creature with dozens of tiny limbs typing simultaneously on 4 pads. Zane cleared his throat. "You wanted to see me." The creature stopped typing. One of the officers stepped forward. "You are Zane Trenton, human designation, engineer Team 6. That's me. Your endurance has raised concern. We believe it may represent a broader unknown factor. We request a demonstration." Zane blinked. "A demonstration of what exactly?" Stress response. "Controlled." He looked at the setup in the room, a platform in the center, surrounded by sensors and what looked unsettlingly like medical restraints. "I didn't agree to a gladiator match. No combat. Environmental simulation." Zane folded his arms. "You're asking me to let you stress me out on purpose just to see what happens?" "Yes. And if I say no, you retain full autonomy, but refusal will limit our capacity to model future incidents," he groaned. "Fine, but I want a sandwich after." The simulation began with a temperature drop. Fast. Within seconds, the platform floor froze under his boots and visible vapor curled from his breath. He shivered but stayed upright. Then came the noise, low-frequency pulses that made his molars ache. He clenched his jaw and breathed through it. Next, the gravity shifted, doubling, then tripling. His knees buckled, then steadied. He felt sweat bead at the back of his neck and freeze instantly. After 4 minutes, the simulation ended. The lights returned to normal. Zane slumped off the platform and sat heavily on the nearby bench. "Happy?" The Valari commander approached. "You exceeded predicted thresholds in all categories. I'm gonna need a foot massage and a nap." The creature with many limbs resumed typing. "Your species must be reclassified. Current models do not sufficiently account for your tolerance range." Zane leaned back and laughed. "Welcome to the party." By the next rotation, word had spread. Everywhere he went, eyes followed, not just wary curious. A few alien crew even approached with questions, asking if he had trained in hostile environments or if Earth's gravity was naturally unstable. One asked if humans routinely consumed bacterial cultures recreationally, having heard something about cheese. He didn't correct them. He just smiled and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Zane's boots scraped faintly as he stepped into the lower diagnostics chamber, the floor slick from condensation. It was warmer than usual, probably a malfunction in the thermal regulators. They'd been acting up since the pathogen sweep had forced half the systems offline. He crouched beside a humming transduction relay, toolkit already unlatched, and started prying the cover loose. Behind him, a series of soft clicks echoed, then a voice with a brittle rasp said, "Your circulatory oxygen saturation is still elevated." Zane didn't look up. "Good morning, Aklor." Aklor approached, tentacles coiled neatly behind its back, the greenish sheen of its skin dappled with shifting patterns that looked like ink in water. It was one of the few Zentari left on board after the voluntary crew rotations. Most of the others had requested reassignment after the outbreak. Too much risk, they claimed, too much uncertainty. "You should not be exerting yourself," Aklor said. "Says the one who once rewired a phase inverter with 3 fractured limbs. I was sedated." Zane grinned and twisted a fastener loose. "Then sedate me and hand me the wrench." Aklor made a low, toneless exhale, an expression of reluctant approval, if Zane remembered correctly. It stepped closer and peered over his shoulder. "The relay is running a feedback loop. You'll need to reroute the secondary capacitor." "That's the plan." Zane reached in, careful not to let his fingers graze the exposed contacts. The secondaries fused to its mount. "I'll need to swap the whole plate." Aklor handed him a replacement. "You completed your biological debrief, 3 hours of blood draws, stool samples, and answering questions like, do you frequently ingest fermented bacterial substrates?" "You do." "Yeah, but I don't like it being called that." Aklor tilted its head. "Your species' capacity for self-induced exposure to microbial cultures remains baffling." Zane slid the new plate into place and checked the alignment. "You ever tried soft cheese on toasted bread?" "No." "Then you're the one missing out." The chamber lights flickered as the circuit stabilized. Aklor blinked twice in rapid succession. "You returned this section to optimal output. Impressive." Zane stood and stretched, his spine popping audibly. "I used to fix HVAC ducts in sub-zero wind tunnels with a wrench that wouldn't stop freezing to my gloves." "This is practically a spa day." Aklor watched him carefully. "You exhibit no residual fatigue. Plenty. I'm just ignoring it until it gives up." "That is not a recommended strategy. It's the human one." Neither spoke for a moment. The relay hummed, steady and low now, the kind of sound Zane had always found oddly calming. Aklor shifted, then said, "I have reviewed the logs of your fever event. You experienced cortical instability, excessive protein folding, and systemic inflammation well beyond survivable margins." "I know." "Your recovery was not merely unlikely, it was mathematically dismissed as impossible." Zane leaned against the wall. "Yeah, that's been the general theme. I've been assigned to compile a psychological profile on human post-crisis behavior. I require context." Zane raised a brow. "You're profiling me now?" "No, I am requesting clarity." "The logs indicate you refused sedation during the peak of your symptoms." "I was afraid I wouldn't wake up." Aklor paused. "That was a logical concern." "Didn't feel logical. Felt like I was clawing through tar in my own brain. Staying awake was the only thing that reminded me I was still me." The Zentari's skin rippled with a slow pulse of color. "That suggests a cognitive prioritization of identity preservation over pain avoidance. That's a fancy way of saying I was stubborn. Stubbornness in the face of lethal deterioration is not common among species with limited regenerative capacity." Zane shrugged. "Well, we don't get second chances, so we make the first one count." Aklor leaned in slightly. "There is something else. Your antibody production rate exceeded baseline by a factor of 7, but more unusually, your white cell populations adapted asymmetrically." "That bad?" "No." "Adaptive asymmetry is associated with creative problem solving at the cellular level, a form of biological improvisation." Zane blinked. "My immune system freelanced?" "Yes, it produced a response with no precedent in our catalogs." Zane rubbed his jaw. "I once fixed a leaking oxygen valve with a sock and chewing gum. Maybe it's genetic." "You believe improvisation is inheritable?" "I believe figuring things out when everything's on fire is just how we work." Aklor stepped back, contemplative. "Then perhaps the virus did not fail to kill you." Perhaps it failed to predict how you'd refuse to let it. They left the diagnostics chamber together, silence stretching comfortably between them as they moved through the corridor. The lights here were dimmer, flickering slightly, but Zane didn't mind. The ship still felt like home, even with the ghosts of the others who hadn't made it. Later that cycle, he stood in the observation gallery, watching a cargo shuttle detach from the docking arm. Its thrusters flared briefly before it drifted into the dark, carrying samples and research logs back to the planetary outpost. Vaic joined him a little while after. She stood beside him without speaking, arms folded, face unreadable. "They asked me to speak with a delegation from the consortium," she said eventually. "Let me guess, they want to know what's wrong with us. They want to know why we didn't break." Zane didn't turn. "What you tell them? That I still wake up sweating and think my skin's peeling off. That I can't taste food without expecting it to go bitter halfway through. That I laugh at things that aren't funny just so I don't start crying instead." Zane nodded slowly. "Sounds about right. They asked if I considered the experience a trauma. What you say?" I told them it was a Tuesday. He finally looked at her. "You know, I think we're going to mess up every model they have. That's the plan." Aklor entered quietly from behind, holding a data pad. "The final reports are complete. The infectious agent no longer poses a threat. It has been neutralized." Zane raised an eyebrow. "So it's over?" "Yes," Aklor said, "and the consortium has reclassified your species' immunological resilience index." "To what?" "Unclassified." "You no longer fit the existing tiers." Zane laughed once short. "I'll take it." Vaic tapped the glass. "So what now?" "We get back to work," Zane said. Aklor inclined its head. "You are permitted to return to Earth. You are no longer under observation." Zane looked out at the stars. "Maybe. But I think I'll stay a while. There's still coolant lines to fix and a lot of confused aliens to keep on their toes." Vaic smiled faintly. "You just like being unpredictable." Zane turned, already heading back toward the lift. "No, I like being underestimated." Aklor watched him go, then turned to Vaic. "Does he always behave in contradiction to statistical logic?" She followed after Zane. "Only when it counts."